How many athletes are there in the United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Less than 10
Yep.
out of 510,000?
Yep.
Are you governed when it comes to the policy of the NCAA by state law?
Of course.
So if 25 of the 50 states currently say that transgender children can play in sports according to their gender identity, you're bound by that standard?
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on this subject?
I think part of our challenge is dealing with a very murky set of court decisions and at the state and federal level around this issue, which creates a certain lack of clarity around our policy, because our policy ultimately needs to comply with federal policy.
This exchange between NCAA Commissioner Charlie Baker and Illinois Senator Dick Durbin really paints the picture of just how minuscule of an issue this is and how Republicans have made it their biggest.
510,000 athletes, 10 transgender athletes nationwide.
Or less.
And to give an idea,
because you allow biological men not only in their sports, but also in their locker rooms. Why do you do that, by the way? Why do your guidelines allow biological men into women's locker rooms without the women's consent, without the women's foreknowledge? Why do you do that?
That's not what our guidelines say.
They do say that. I've got them right here. Your guidelines say that transgender student athletes should be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet facilities in accordance with their gender identity.
And
here they are, right here.
And then everybody else should have an opportunity to use other facilities if they wish to do so.
Okay, so the burden's on the women. So if the women then want to move to a different facility, in other words, if they want to abandon their own locker room, you're saying that they should have to do that? So in other words, it's their problem?
No, we put a significant amount of emphasis on what the locals' plans are, and we make sure that everybody.
What does that mean, the locals' plans?
Whoever it is that's hosting the event.
You have guidelines that instruct them what the best practices are, and your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all, correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities.
Josh Hawley of Missouri continues to remain in the good graces of MAGA Republicans by going after a marginalized group.
And biological males, you allowing biological males to compete against biological females. And you folks at the NCAA don't do anything except sit there, watch, cash your checks, and suck on your teeth.
I would argue that we've made a lot of progress on a bunch of those
Why don't
issues.
you take a position on transgender biological males competing against females? You just told me it wasn't fair.
There's a federal standard on this is one that we would work with you on if you wish to work on it.
Why don't you do it on your own?
Because we're a national
what you're
governing
there
body
for,
and we
Charles.
follow federal law.
That's what you're there for. Why don't you stand up and say in front of God and country, federal law is wrong, and the NCAA believes in fair competition. We also believe in equality. If you want to, in America, you can be whatever you want to be. You can be whomever you want to be. But our job is to promote fairness in sports.
Our job
Biological males are not going to be allowed to compete against biological females. Why don't you go to Amazon and buy a spine online and take a stand?
Rich coming from this blowhard. But again, it shows how they're going all in on an issue, repeated after me, that is a non-issue. Before we get into it, two things. Number one, I have a new show coming out that I would love for you to support and subscribe to. It will be the Rick Strom Show, purely interview-based with people that I love talking to. So please go over and sub. Baker brought up a more pressing issue that those two senators did not even care to shine a light on.
The harassment that I speak of is far more prevalent in major women's championships than it is in men's championships. And in fact, the data that we put forward from our our major championships last year showed that the worst examples of online threats, abuse, and harassment were being directed at women basketball players playing in our women's basketball tournament. That, in many respects, I think, is not as well known as it should be. We tried to do a pretty good job to promote it and make clear to people that that was, in fact, the championship that had the most brutal and the most troubling and the nastiest collection. And all we know of is what shows up on their public handle. We don't know what's on the stuff they're getting in their direct messages. We talked to a lot of the folks who played in those tournaments, and they said the stuff that comes in on their DMs is a lot worse than the stuff that we see on their public handle.
I wish my colleagues who share my concern and yours for the future of women's sports could have heard your testimony. I think it's very important.
To be clear, via The Hill, a recent cross-sectional study that was published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. What did they find? Trans women who completed more than 1 year of hormone replacement therapy performed worse than cis women in some tests that would measure lower body strength and lung functioning. So this idea already off the bat is stating what we knew, that there may not be a competitive advantage, but the problem is, and I'm going to continue in a second, the problem is Republican voters have delineated from giving credence and value to accuracy and facts in the form of specifically this example, science. Like, if we have seen anything from 2020, it is the erosion of public trust in our institutions and saying, I know more than a climate scientist. I know more than a neurologist. I know more than someone who studies viruses for a living because I saw something from Russell Brand on Facebook. That is how far we are, that this will fall on deaf ears. But let's continue in case we're not. They'd go on to write, the bone density of trans women, which is linked to muscle strength, was found to be equivalent of cis women. How about that? There were no meaningful differences in levels of hemoglobin, which facilitates H2O, baby. And that being the delivery to muscles and is related to greater aerobic performance. Again, this will not be a position that will be changed overnight. It will be changed over time. But it's also why we have to continue to fight for these people, because they are human. And they are being taken advantage of by con artists that like to score cheap political points and get into office, benefit from insider trading, in my opinion, stock trades, what have you, and become mega millionaires through their donors, all because you're attacking people that just want to play. Lastly, an earlier study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, which is already published, their findings were that trans women who went through male puberty retained an athletic edge after 1 year of hormone therapy. The study's lead author has cautioned against using the results to categorically ban trans athletes from competitive sports. This is why, in my opinion, the Aaron Rodgerses of the world, the Joe Rogans of the world, continue to hold this grudge at what we thought we knew at the onset of the pandemic. But as we have learned, if you're following it, science is ever changing. Medical opinions are ever changing. And when I see this, I see a great similarity to that, to the beginning of COVID and how some things were wrong and some things remain right. But what's very important is to keep evolving and keep learning and keep understanding and continue to go into it with an open mind. And here's the cherry on top, by the way. Not only Did the NCAA take action by banning trans women in sports? Do you know what this hearing was about? Because it wasn't about trans women in collegiate sports. It was on the subject of legalized sports betting. It was a hearing on the Supporting Affordability and Fairness with Every Bet Act. Yet those two that you saw completely hijacked the hearing and wanted to make Charlie Baker and the NCAA look like fools. For, again, to score cheap political points, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Fox News, whether it's on OAN, Newsmax, The Charlie Kirk Show, Candace Owens. It's all that it is. Once you start seeing this, you'll have a better understanding of how these hearings are sometimes very important and sometimes theatrical, because that's exactly what Kennedy and Hawley are doing. There is no need to talk about corruption in politics. Let's focus on trans people. Hey, there's no need to talk about how the healthcare industry is ripping us off. Let's talk about trans people. Hey, there's no reason to talk about why our food is poisoned and why statistically blue states support red states and why Elon Musk is, in my view, stealing money from the American taxpayer. No, let's talk about trans people, because that's what plays. It's sickening. As Sean Fluharty wrote, congressional hearing on sports betting turned into a hearing on political tantrums on manufactured outrage over NCAA trans athlete policy. If Congress wants to jump in on sports betting, maybe find some adults in the room first. That was embarrassing. Yeah, it was. It really was. And by the way, what they were talking about from iGaming Business, the law would require states with legal sports betting to get federal approval to continue. It also lays out what would be some of the most stringent advertising guidelines in the world. In essence, it would attempt to reverse the 2018 SCOTUS decision that made legal sports betting a states' rights issue. How many times have we heard that? The key issues were banning college player prop bets and curbing harassment of college athletes by the bettors. But that wasn't the focus. It was political theater. If you can and are willing, please become a paid member here at TYT Sports. And or go to tyt.com/join. In addition, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Appreciate it. Have a great day.